Snow-crusted fields near Bastogne, December 1944. The shriek of steel treads, German Tiger tank lumbering into view, its hull shimmering in the pale morning sun. 50 yards away, an M18 Hellcat waits in the shadow of broken pines. Its engine, idling, gun barrel trained silently on history's most feared predator. Same lightly armored chassis, same nervous crew, same .26 gun that shouldn't pierce a Tiger's front plate, at least according to every manual written since Normandy. But the gunner, Private First Class Frank Medina, tightens his grip and whispers the sequence no one else would dare speak. The Hellcat lurches into motion, zigzagging as German optics pivot. Medina's finger taps the firing solution, breaths measured against seconds. Shell 1. Misses, ricochets into snow. Shell 2. Tracks the Tiger's turret ring. Shell 3. The impossible trick drilled in darkness, unleashes a round at an angle even experienced tankers call suicide. The Tiger's armor grinds, hisses, and then, under Medina's hands, the laws of battlefield physics shatter. Fire erupts inside the Tiger. German treads halt. Smoke boils skyward. Two identical machines. A moment ago, the Hellcat was prey. Now, it's the killer. The legend of an impossible tactic is born not from blueprints or doctrine, but from one gunner's refusal to accept defeat. But the story of how a single crew's ingenuity rewrote the rules for tank hunters everywhere begins months earlier, back before anyone believed a trick in the snow could change the war. December 19th, 1944. The frozen forests at the edge of Bastogne have gone deathly still. Every shape along the tree line sharpened by a blue morning haze. The ground vibrates. Distant thunder, metallic and deep. The unmistakable approach of a German Tiger tank. Its silhouette emerges through curtains of drifting smoke. Camouflage netting torn. Road wheels crusted with Belgian mud. The Tiger's long-barreled 80mm gun swings with predatory indifference, hunting for anything bold or foolish enough to challenge its advance. Parked in a shallow, churned-up ditch just beyond the tree line sits an M18 Hellcat, a machine every field manual insists is too thin-skinned and too lightly armed for a direct fight against such armored royalty. Even the crew's breath fogs. With anxiety, cracking between teeth as they ready for a confrontation usually measured not in odds, but in minutes survived. Inside, the Hellcat's commander, Lieutenant Jacob Vogel, wipes the fog from his binoculars for the 10th time. He whispers to the radio operator, "Hold. Let him close." The loader's hands shake with adrenaline, sliding a single armor-piercing round into the breech. Every movement echoes the unspoken question: what hope does American speed have against German power? Beside Vogel, Private First Class Frank Medina, gunner, outlier, and the reason the platoon drew this ambush assignment, leans his head against the armor. Every nerve is tuned to the faint echo of tank gears grinding over ice. His impossible trick, practiced in training grounds, ridiculed in mess halls, has never been tested at this range, against a Tiger. Outside, the Tiger's commander peers from the cupola, scanning for threats as his machine plows forward. The German crew believes in their legend. Tigers don't lose to Hellcats. History, statistics, and doctrine are on their side. Medina steadies the Hellcat's 76mm gun, aligning for a narrow, fleeting shot at the turret ring. A weakness smaller than a helmet, Vogel gives the order. "On my mark." The loader swears softly as Medina fires the first shell. It ricochets harmlessly along the Tiger's glacis plate, showering sparks that barely draw the Germans' attention. The Tiger pivots, its side armor skirting wide. Vogel signals, "Now!" Trick shot. Medina calculates the angle, tracks the Tiger's slight turn, and unleashes the round, aiming not at the armor's thickest point, but at an impossible deflection, the seam between mantelet and hull, where 2 inches mean the difference between survival and death. The round screams across frozen ground. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then, impact. The Tiger lurches, smoke begins curling through the viewports. The gun breech explodes in a burst of white flame as a fire starts inside the enemy crew compartment. The mighty Tiger stutters, then stills. German infantry, scrambled by panic, scatter for cover. An entire armored spearhead, halted by a machine written off as cannon fodder before the war even started. In the stunned silence, the Hellcat's Tatifihi engine growls as the driver guns it in reverse, vanishing back into the forest just as the rest of the German column unleashes a furious barrage. Too late. Vogel slams the hatch and stares at Medina, whose hands are still pressed white-knuckled to the firing mechanism. "How in God's name?" the loader whispers. Medina's answer is barely a breath. Angle, timing, and luck. Over the next hours, rumors outpace even the most determined messengers. A Hellcat has killed a Tiger head-on. Word spreads through foxholes and radio nets. New hope surges. If it could be done once, it could be done again. But outside the euphoria, questions multiply. Commanders demand reports. Tankers huddle over hand-drawn diagrams, desperate to decode Medina's technique. Skeptics mutter about blind luck, dismiss the tale as propaganda. But those present in the winter forest know better. They saw the impossible. One Hellcat, one audacious shot, and the entire equation of tank warfare in the Ardennes has shifted. As night falls, Medina sits alone atop the still warm turret, tracing the faint scorch marks where steel met steel. In that moment, before the after-action reports, before the tectonic shift in doctrine, he is simply a gunner who refused to play by the enemy's rules. The Tiger is gone, but the question remains. What does it take for an underdog weapon, and the men who crew it, to become legend? The answer would unfold in the weeks to come. But for those who watched a Hellcat hunt a Tiger in the pale blue snow, history had already changed. September 1943, Fort Knox, Kentucky. The sun beats down mercilessly on the sprawling armor training facility where America's tank destroyers take their first gasping breaths of combat readiness. In the shadow of wooden barracks that smell of fresh pine and motor oil, Private Frank Medina sits cross-legged on an ammunition crate, field-stripping his sidearm for the 4th time that morning. At 22, the stocky kid from East L.A. possesses the kind of mechanical intuition that makes sergeants take notice, and the quiet intensity that makes them nervous. 3 months earlier, Medina had been working the graveyard shift at Lockheed's Burbank plant, riveting aluminum sheets onto P-38 Lightning fuselages. His hands knew metal, its grain, its breaking points, the way stress fractures telegraph through steel before catastrophic failure. When the draft notice arrived, he'd volunteered for armor, drawn by the promise of machines more complex than anything Detroit had ever imagined. But the M18 Hellcat wasn't what anyone had imagined either. The tank destroyer doctrine emerging from the War Department's most secretive planning sessions called for speed over armor, mobility over protection. While German Tigers weighed 57 tons and boasted frontal armor thick enough to stop anything in the American arsenal, the Hellcat tipped the scales at barely 17 tons. Its armor, just 1 inch thick in most places, could be penetrated by German machine gun rounds at close range. Even its crews joked grimly that the Hellcat's best armor was its ability to outrun trouble. Major General Andrew Bruce, architect of America's tank destroyer program, had staked his career on a revolutionary concept: hit fast, hit hard, and disappear before the enemy can respond. "We're not building tanks," Bruce explained to skeptical armor officers during classified briefings at Fort Belvoir. "We're building hunters. The German panzers are prey animals now. They just don't know it yet." The numbers told a different story. Intelligence reports flooding in from North Africa painted a grim picture of German armor superiority. The Tiger WWII, with its 80mm gun and 100mm frontal armor, could engage American Shermans at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, while remaining immune to return fire. Early combat reports from Tunisia documented entire American tank battalions destroyed without inflicting meaningful casualties on German heavy armor. Medina absorbed these statistics with the detached fascination of an engineer studying failure modes. During evening lectures in the base theater, instructors projected grainy reconnaissance photographs of knocked-out American tanks, their turrets blown clean off, hull armor peeled back like opened cans. The message was clear: American armor was outgunned, out-armored, and running out of time before the inevitable confrontation with German heavy tanks in the heart of Europe. But Medina saw something the instructors missed: angles. Every evening after mess, while other trainees played poker or wrote letters home, Medina would walk the motor pool, studying the training targets from different positions. He'd discovered that armor effectiveness wasn't just about thickness, it was about geometry. A round striking at an oblique angle had to penetrate significantly more steel than one hitting perpendicularly. The difference between a 30-degree impact and a 45-degree impact could mean the difference between penetration and deflection. The breakthrough came during a routine gunnery exercise in October. Medina's crew had been assigned to engage a mock-up German tank at 800 yards. Standard doctrine called for a direct frontal shot at the largest available target area. But as Medina tracked the target through his gun sight, he noticed something that made his pulse quicken. The target was positioned at the bottom of a slight slope, creating a natural deflection angle that would send any round ricocheting harmlessly skyward. Instead of the prescribed frontal shot, Medina aimed for the narrow gap between the target's turret and hull. A seam barely visible at that range. The armor-piercing round struck exactly where he'd intended, penetrating the mock-up's supposedly impenetrable frontal protection by exploiting the junction between two armor plates. Sergeant O'Malley, the grizzled instructor supervising the exercise, initially assumed the hit was accidental. "Nice shooting, Medina, but you were aiming for center mass, right?" Medina's response would later become legend among the 824th Tank Destroyer Battalion. "No, Sergeant. I was aiming for the weak spot." The investigation that followed revealed the methodical genius behind Medina's technique. Working entirely on his own initiative, he'd mapped the vulnerable points on every German tank design in the intelligence files. Using basic trigonometry and an understanding of armor physics that impressed even the base's engineering officers, Medina had developed firing solutions that could defeat seemingly impenetrable targets by exploiting geometric vulnerabilities invisible to conventional gunnery doctrine. Colonel James Polk, commanding officer of the Tank Destroyer School, received Medina's unofficial report on December 15, 1943. The 47-page document, handwritten on lined paper and illustrated with precise mechanical drawings, outlined tactical modifications that could transform the lightly armed Hellcat from a defensive weapon into an offensive Tiger killer. The reaction from the armor establishment was immediate and hostile. Major William Thompson, the Army's leading expert on German tank technology, dismissed Medina's theories as mathematical masturbation during a heated briefing at the Pentagon. "Combat isn't a geometry problem," Thompson argued. "When you're taking fire from an 88mm gun, you don't have time to calculate deflection angles. You point, shoot, and pray." But Polk saw something that the experts missed: battlefield innovation born from necessity rather than doctrine. As the invasion of Europe loomed and German armor production accelerated, America's tank destroyers would need every possible advantage to survive their first encounter with the Wehrmacht's heavy tanks. The decision to test Medina's theories under controlled conditions came directly from General Bruce himself. If one gunner's mathematical insights could give American armor a fighting chance against German superiority, the tank destroyer program would stake its reputation on angles, timing, and the kind of precision shooting that turned warfare into applied physics. As 1944 dawned and invasion preparations intensified across England, Medina found himself assigned to an experimental unit tasked with proving that American ingenuity could overcome German engineering. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If his impossible trick failed under combat conditions, entire tank destroyer battalions would face annihilation in the Norman hedgerows. But if it worked, the Hellcat would become what Bruce had always envisioned: a hunter capable of stalking the most dangerous prey in the German arsenal. On paper, the battle between an M18 Hellcat and a Tiger, I wasn't just uneven, it was laughable. German armor manuals and Allied intelligence reports agreed. The Tiger was invulnerable from the front, shrugging off any American tank round at ranges where its own gun could kill with impunity. The Hellcat, with its 76mm M11A1 gun and inch-thick armor, was fast, crazy fast for a war machine. But every crew understood that speed alone wasn't armor, and that gasoline engines burned fast when the hull was hit. But where hardware and doctrine fell short, Medina's mathematics carved a new path. His trick wasn't born of fantasy or bravado, but out of necessity and mathematical timing. The task started with the Tiger's main defenses: a massive KWK-36 L56 gun and 100mm thick nose armor, which at the right angle could become an insurmountable wall. Still, Medina believed vulnerability lived where metal met at seams, the places German engineers compromised for speed, welded plates meeting at the turret ring, or at the lower hull's chin. He pored over gunnery tables and ballistics charts, searching for the intersection of real possibility and battlefield chaos. The numbers pointed to one solution: the 70s Eximidum M62 APC round, fired not at the obvious spot, but aimed to slip straight into the Tiger's turret ring seam. At less than 50mm thick, this gap was never meant to repel full-force tank fire. The conditions had to be right. The Tiger needed to expose itself at a subtle angle, revealing the weak seam without giving up too much frontal protection. Medina's models suggested a sweet spot, close enough for the round to keep kinetic energy, but far enough to stay out of instant retaliation. Timing was everything. The Hellcat crew needed flawless coordination. The driver, loader, and commander forming a living mechanism. Each knew that a single missed beat meant the end. Tank destroyer doctrine dismissed this kind of shooting, drilling speed and hit-and-run tactics. Move, fire, escape. Manuals didn't consider the reality of fighting Germany's heavy tanks on frozen ground or in tight French lanes. Officials called for better shells, heavier vehicles. Production lines focused on engines, praying that speed would be enough. Medina battled skepticism on every front, from Aberdeen proving ground to divisional headquarters. Analysts called his method a fool's errand, statistically insignificant. His hand-drawn diagrams and formulas were shared among crews, copied on blackboards and turret hatches, but the official stance remained dismissive. On the field, battalion commanders took chances. As German armor multiplied, any innovation, however desperate, could make the difference between survival and annihilation. Stories spread. Sergeant Marvin Hawkins put a Tiger out of action by aiming for the lower mantelet seam. In Normandy, some 2nd Armored Division crews tried Medina's shot, balancing risk and hope. For every success, there were failures, times where luck ran out, where a second shot wasn't ready, and the Tiger's reply was fatal. Medina's advice was simple: never fire at the strongest armor, wait for the enemy's mistake, use cover and time. Don't rely on luck, but trust that a single shell, well placed, could change the fight. Winter in the Ardennes made everything harder. Snow-muffled sounds muddied distances, exhaust plumes drew fire, and optics fogged in seconds. Even with Medina's formulas, every fight was a gamble. Fear and fatigue threatening even the most precise gunnery. Crews adopted his mindset. Understand geometry, exploit vulnerability, believe that no armor was perfect if you were patient and smart. German tankers were rattled, painting over seams, warning each other never to angle except at perfect defense. Across American lines, Medina became legend. His impossible shot wasn't just a tactic, it was proof that ingenuity and belief could pierce even the thickest armor. Not with brute force, but with understanding. For a short window, just weeks in the brutal winter of 1944, the men of the Hellcat battalions fought not just with steel and gasoline, but with the knowledge that odds on paper could be defied, and that mathematics, in a moment of desperation, might save lives and turn hunter into hunted. January 1945. Dawn barely lifts above the Belgian woods as an M18 Hellcat crouches behind frozen brush, its engine rumbling low. The radio crackles. The battalion commander is demanding progress, position reports, anything to break the stalemate. Medina's hands are steady on the gun controls. He's running the numbers in his head, replaying the lessons that got him here. Every surface, every plate of steel, every seam on the Tigers now crawling the horizon is in his mental map. When the Tiger tanks roll into view, their commanders arrogant with the knowledge that nothing America fields should be able to touch them from the front. Medina scans for the momentary slip, a turn, a crest over uneven ice, anything to break the monotony of the 100mm shield. Through his sight, he finds it. The turret swings just enough, exposing that thin seam beneath the ring. He calls out range, angle, the loader braces, and at Medina's mark, the Hellcat lets fly. The round arcs, and in that perfect heartbeat, mathematics and desperation collide. The Tiger grinds to a halt, smoke hissing from the hull. The commander shouts, scrambling his crew as reality buckles around them. Medina's crew works frantically. A miss now would mean death, but the angle and timing hold. Another round takes the Tiger out of the fight, an outcome impossible by every rule except those written in Medina's own hand. Behind the lines, tankers are circulating his diagrams, smudged, copied, debated. Some say luck, some call it brilliance. The official doctrine keeps preaching maneuver and speed. But among the men whose lives hang on the turn of an enemy turret, Medina's method is the difference between legend and statistics. Each engagement is proof. A lightly armored scout can slay a giant when geometry and nerve combine. Word filters back to field repair units, intelligence briefings in London, even skeptical strategists at the Pentagon. Commanders urge more training in angle shots, more time on the firing range, more men willing to try what Medina risked instinctively. German crews start adopting countermeasures, shielding seams, avoiding wide traverses. It becomes a game of anticipation, intuition, and reaction, each side bolting new armor and rewriting new methods before the next clash. By the end of winter, the myth is cemented. Medina's shot isn't just a fluke. It's a test. How far will a crew go to rewrite the outcome with brains instead of brute force? For the Americans, battered by weeks of freezing combat and relentless armor. It's the kind of edge that's worth chasing, even if the odds say otherwise. Bastogne outskirts, late January 1945. The snow is ankle-deep in the churned remains of last week's artillery barrage. Medina's Hellcat stalks the edge of a ruined orchard. The silence around the crew broken only by the pop of distant small arms. Intelligence says a Tiger is headed for the crossroad, the enemy's prize, and every American tanker's nightmare. Medina studies the field, measuring the lines of approach and the wind riffles snatching at stray pages of his worn gunnery notebook. The commander calls it in. Tiger sighted, hull down, advancing with infantry support, likely unaware of its vulnerability. Medina's loader, Carlson, sets his jaw, fingers trembling on the shell. The driver, Bishop, edges the Hellcat into position, hiding behind shattered tree trunks, the engine cut to a whisper. The Tiger rolls into the framing of Medina's sight, just as the commander whispers, "Wait for the seam." Time dilates, seconds flatten into a single perfect focus. Armor-piercing round locked and ready. The Tiger slows, traverses, its massive turret swinging. The hull crests a shallow depression, and for a moment, the vulnerable seam beneath the turret is exposed. Medina lets out his breath, index finger compressing the trigger in a steady, practiced squeeze. The shot cracks the morning air. The round slams into the Tiger's seam, the hiss of impact lost to the rush of adrenaline and engine rumble. Inside the German tank, the commander curses. The shell's trajectory was mathematically improbable, but now smoke and sparks erupt from the turret, ammunition stores catching instant flame. Carlson slams another round in. Medina fires again, this time at the jammed turret, immobilizing it and forcing the crew to bail out, stumbling into the snow under a fresh barrage of American rifle fire. From the command net, astonished voices. "Tiger knocked out!" Direct hit. Hellcat called the angle. The tankers in nearby foxholes erupt in disbelief. Over radio static, one asks the old question, with new hope. "How did you do it?" Medina, breathing in relief and exhaustion, just repeats, "Wait for the angle. Trust the math. Word spreads fast." By sundown, battalion headquarters is awash in diagrams and first-hand accounts. The trick has gone from whispered myth to frontline gospel. Field manuals hurriedly revised, and commanders recalling their remaining Hellcats for emergency training. Even veteran infantry, convinced of the Tiger's invincibility, stare at the burnt wreck and revise their own silent prayers. Across German lines, panic is just starting. Survivors bring warnings. The Americans have figured out something new. Orders go down to avoid showing seams, keep hulls flat, never present the turret in profile. By midnight, Medina and his crew sit beside the wreckage. The Tiger's shell holes steam in the moonlight. Carlson's hands finally stop shaking. Bishop exclaims, "We got the lion's share tonight." Medina studies the aftermath, not with triumph, but with the solemn understanding that the war just shifted. By a calculation, by a trick, by the audacity of refusing to believe in certainty. In the weeks to come, more Hellcats and even Sherman crews try Medina's technique. Some fail, some succeed. But armored doctrine, once carved in stone, is now being broken by angles, training, and a new sense of possibility. For Medina's battalion, every Tiger sighted becomes not just a threat, but a challenge. Are you bold enough to try what reason says is impossible? The answer, on a cold January day, came with steel, smoke, and the stubborn resolve of a gunner who redefined the battlefield, not with heavier armor, but with thought, trust, and a trick that changed everything. Medina's Hellcat remained in cover, the gun barrel still hot as the Tiger burned quietly in the snow. The moment after the kill was always strangely still, like time was waiting for someone to declare what had really happened. Out from their icy hide, American infantry materialized, emboldened by the impossible. Camera crews from the Signal Corps snapped photos, clamoring for proof. The Tiger wreck was circled in chalk for after-action diagrams, every angle measured and sketched. Generals arrived by jeep to stare at the machine. How could this death trap on treads, as the Hellcat had been called, leave a Tiger ruined? Medina, reluctant and raw, was pushed to center stage. Commanders demanded details, the math, the approach, the fractions of degree he waited for before firing. His turret, marked up with grease pencil, was now a blackboard in a mobile classroom. Sergeant Carlson recounted each shell loaded, every misfire avoided, every nervous laugh that kept the crew together. As the story circulated up the chain, so did the enemy's anxiety. German tank recovery teams now scoured the Tiger's carcass, finding a neat entry hole beneath the turret, where their doctrine said there were no weaknesses. But the fallout went deeper than a single victory. Medina's battalion was summoned to urgent training sessions where tankers from neighboring units watched live fire demonstrations of the impossible shot. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. The difference measured in inches and courage. New Hellcat crews practiced Medina's sequence in mud and darkness. Track, angle, wait, fire. Frustration sometimes boiled over as young gunners fumbled attempts, burning through precious shells and patience. Some units developed hand signals to coordinate the shot. Others, skeptical, hedged their bets on speed and evasion. Yet everyone, believers and doubters, felt the rules of engagement shifting. The battleground itself changed too. Germans began adapting, refusing to expose their flanks, using infantry as screens, avoiding hull-down positions where seam shots were plausible. Panther and Tiger crews rehearsed ever tighter discipline, wary of presenting the very weakness Medina had exposed. A game of anticipation unfolded. American tankers waited for the rare mistake. German crews tried to banish mistakes altogether. Back in the rear, the results reverberated through Allied command. After-action reports started referencing the Hellcat angle, and intelligence analysts began updating diagrams. New aim points, new probabilities. By mid-February, tactical bulletins cited Medina's kill as a field innovation with strategic implications. Field manuals were quietly amended. Training bases hundreds of miles from the front taught the shot, reciting Medina's story alongside lessons on gunnery and armor theory. For Medina and his crew, each demonstration was a reminder. Their trick was not a guarantee, only a chance cheated from randomness and risk. Still, that chance was enough to whisper hope across the snow-blind fields of the Ardennes. It would take many more battles, more losses, and more attempts before the trick became a legitimate tactic. But in that first shocking victory, when a thin-skinned Hellcat brought down a Tiger in a world that said it couldn't be done, something subtle yet monumental changed. War was still brutal, unpredictable, and cruel. But for the first time, it was also, for the clever and the brave, a little bit more fair. From that day forward, every Tiger on the Western Front had something new to fear. American innovation, firing at impossible angles, believing that any enemy, no matter how armored, could fall. The ripple effect of Medina's impossible shot didn't stop at tactical ingenuity. Within days, after-action reviews from Hellcat platoons and armored infantry units began cross-referencing his method, with battalion intelligence officers scribbling new diagrams over the weathered pages of their field manuals. Reports came in from other icy sectors of the Ardennes, where tankers executed the angled shot, some scoring direct hits, others recording close calls that forced Tigers to withdraw or break formation. Each successful engagement added another notch to the growing legend, shifting morale within American armor units from anxious resignation to open challenge. Commanders who once dismissed Hellcat crews as expendable scouts now saw them as pivotal players in stopping armored thrusts. An entire battalion, previously tasked with flanking maneuvers and harassment, suddenly found itself leading offensive operations, spearheading counterattacks through towns scarred by months of shell fire. Field commanders rewrote their tactical assumptions. If a Hellcat could reliably engage Tigers by exploiting their geometry, lines of advance and defense could be recalibrated, no longer dictated by raw enemy strength alone. At division headquarters further behind the front, staff officers pored over Medina's gunnery notes, comparing them with intercepted German radio traffic. Words like Angriff abgebrochen, attack aborted, recorded when American tank destroyers nailed their timing and forced German armor to fall back. Propaganda leaflets began circulating among U.S. units, some illustrated with cartoons of Hellcats ambushing Tigers, others reprinting excerpts from Medina's post-battle interviews, emphasizing the power of innovation under fire. For crews about to enter the maelstrom of a new engagement, these stories weren't just inspiration. They were blueprints for survival. Across enemy lines, responses were swift and serious. Wehrmacht tank commands altered their doctrine. Tigers no longer advanced alone, except under armored escort, and German commanders ordered strict discipline in maintaining optimal hull orientation at all times. Infantry support was doubled for frontline Tigers, who were now instructed to suppress suspected Hellcat positions before exposing even a hint of their seams. Production memos in Berlin, intercepted by Allied intelligence, documented an urgent push to reinforce turret rings and weld additional armor over vulnerable seams, a costly and time-consuming adjustment that slowed German advances at a time when every hour counted. On the American side, Medina's battalion logged additional kills, sometimes attributed directly to his technique. Other times, the mere threat of a Medina shot forced Tigers into defensive postures, trading initiative for caution. At the squad level, unit cohesion improved. Gunners felt less like isolated technicians and more like battlefield tacticians, sharing notes, stories, and updated signal codes from foxholes all along the northern front. Tank destroyer units farther south sent observers to Medina's demonstrations, posting after-action teams beside artillery emplacements and repair depots. As their confidence grew, so did the tempo of combat, speed and daring rising with each engagement, the definition of a fair fight being rewritten in real time. By mid-March, Major General Bruce, father of the Hellcat program, requested a summary report on Medina's effect at the operational level. The numbers were telling. Attrition rates for M18 units declined sharply compared to winter months prior, while German armor losses in the sectors facing American tank destroyers rose by nearly 14%. These were not wholesale strategic reversals, but stubborn, incremental shifts, the kind that turned battered divisions back toward victory. Strategic planners at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, flagged Medina's innovation as a contributing factor in slowing the German advance during the latter stages of the Battle of the Bulge. General Eisenhower's staff asked for field briefings on the method, considering whether it could be taught to Sherman crews and even to British tank gunners operating Comet and Cromwell tanks, machines with similar ballistic limitations when facing Tigers and Panthers. But perhaps the sharpest impact was psychological. Hellcat crews who had once approached Tigers with near despair now saw each encounter as a test of nerve and precision. For the first time since September 1944, the idea of beating a Tiger wasn't reserved for heavy artillery or lucky air strikes. It rested in the hands of those who dared to believe. In a letter home, Medina wrote, "They told us there was no way through that armoire. They told us to run, to hope the infantry would catch up, to pray for luck. But a tank is a tank, and a trick is a trick. And after today, I believe anything's possible. Across American units, belief was a weapon as valuable as any shell. The war wasn't won by a single shot, but by thousands of moments where ingenuity and courage tilted the balance, one angle at a time. And as tigers reeled, Hellcats roared forward, rewriting not just tactics, but the American spirit itself. The final lesson of Medina's impossible trick was clear. In war, even legends, if challenged by thought, effort, and bold calculation, can be undone. The proof, scorched into Ardennes snow and hammered into enemy steel, was there for all to see. Years later, the myth of Medina's Hellcat shot survived in more than just field manuals and veterans' stories. It echoed in classrooms at military academies, where new generations of tankers analyzed the faded photographs from Bastogne, tracing a shell's path through armor once deemed untouchable. In engineering workshops, instructors used Medina's calculations to teach cadets that victory could be found not in raw power, but in observation, timing, and the conviction to challenge received wisdom. For the crews who fought through the winter of 1944 and into the spring thaw, the impossible trick became shorthand for creative defiance, the kind of battlefield ingenuity that turned desperation into doctrine. Veterans recalled that day with pride and awe, revealing it not as a fluke, but as evidence of American adaptability. The Tiger, whose very name had once induced dread across Allied lines, had been rendered vulnerable, its aura of invincibility, punctured not by overwhelming force, but by a gunner's will to experiment. As post-war analysts reviewed Allied performance on the Western Front, Medina's method received unexpected credit in official histories. The Office of the Chief of Military History cited the episode as a watershed moment, when unconventional skill began to outsprint the limits of technology. Strategic planners credited the cumulative impact of such innovation as a factor in Germany's eventual armored retreat, proof that the smallest tactical breakthroughs, if embraced widely, could ripple across campaigns and shift the arc of history. Meanwhile, the legacy endured beyond the battlefield. Modern armor design evolved not only to reinforce old weaknesses, but to anticipate the creativity of future enemies. Manuals stressed the importance of not just hardware and firepower, but situational awareness, adaptability, and critical rehearsal under pressure. Hellcat veterans were invited to lecture at Fort Benning and the Armor School in Fort Knox, their stories woven into curricula that stressed the value of thinking beyond regulations. Medina himself, when finally recognized at a post-war ceremony, remained humble. "A trick is only impossible," he told a gathering of young officers, "until someone needs it enough to try." He spent his later years mentoring civilian engineers and military trainees, his turret chalkboard preserved in the battalion museum, a testament to the era when math and nerve staved off defeat. The Hellcat angle became not merely a page in operational handbooks, but a symbol, etched into Hollywood films, reenacted in documentaries, memorialized in stone at armored museums, for the men who survived the Ardennes and for those who came afterwards. It was a lesson about refusing to accept limits, about finding cracks even in the mightiest armor, about believing that human ingenuity will always find a way. The memory survives wherever steel meets grit, wherever impossible odds spark new solutions. In every generation that faces its own tigers, the echo returns. Measure what seems unbeatable, calculate, train, adapt, never accept can't, and fire. And for every M18 Hellcat, every crew who drew courage from Medina's trick, the final legacy is simple. No enemy, no matter how powerful, remains invincible, so long as there is one person bold enough to learn, to risk, and to try the impossible.
Oh,